filling in for. Oh,
Not live yet.
there it is. Good morning. This is Brian Vanzone. I am filling in for Holly Magnuson, and this is Ask the Security Guy with Shawn Kohrman. Today we're going to be covering the popularity of smartphones, and particularly Android versus the iPhone, and kind of review some maybe misconceptions or kind of show different lights of each platform as they pertain and how popular they are. So, Shawn, wanted to see how you want to start this off.
Sure. So, in the news, we've been seeing a lot of articles about, this Android attack and that Apple attack and we're talking about phones. And more recently in the news, we've been seeing, there's this malware now that's attacking iPhones. And the first big one that came out only worked on jailbroken iPhones, and then there was another one that works on non-jailbroken iPhones. And so I'm getting a lot of questions, which one's more secure, Android or Apple? And it's really a long-standing argument that goes back to which one's more secure, which one, Mac OS versus Windows. Now, instead of Windows, it now is Android. And it in some circles it's almost a religious argument, because people have very strong beliefs that one is better than the other. And from a security standpoint, it's really interesting to look at it because it illustrates a long-standing trend with Apple itself as a company. So the Android marketplace is based on open source software, and the Google Play Store has fairly good but not great controls around how applications are added to the store. Apple has their iTunes store and their App Store, and the controls there are supposedly much stronger than the Google Play Store. At least that's how it's advertised. What's interesting now is we've seen cases, and we're seeing more cases where Chinese hackers have demonstrated ways to get infected applications into the Apple Store without really any effort and without any detection by Apple. So what that means is, some of these applications are already Trojanized or infected. So when you download them, install them to your iPhone, you're bringing in whatever payload came with it. So to come back to this argument of which one's more secure, I think the answer to the question really there is not a question of which one's more secure, but how you use it. So we talk about jailbreaking our devices, and for some of our users, that may be a familiar concept. For others, it may be not. But the idea is we're breaking the built-in controls so that we can add more software. So the plus side to that is for those who are really tech savvy, it allows them a much finer degree of control of their device. The downside is it breaks a lot of the built-in security controls that protect the device.
And just for a clarification, jailbreaking is also the equivalent known as rooting on the Android platform. So those are the interchangeable, just one goes to one term, commonly used jailbreak for Apple.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. So, as we dig into this, it's interesting because really people ask me, why are they going after Windows, or why are they going after Android, and and they don't go after my Mac, or they don't go after my iPhone? Well, that's really a function of market share. So there's a couple things that your cyber attackers, your criminals are going to go after. One is low-hanging fruit, and the other is the broadest surface where they can get revenue from. So Android far and away has the most market share in the smartphone market. Depending on which statistics you look at, they're right around 70 to 80% of the world market share in smartphones, whereas the iPhone is trailing pretty significantly far behind on that. So if you're looking at the interest in one platform or another, which one you're going to get the most bang for your buck on if you're an attacker, it's really the Android side. Another thing to consider too is the Android operating system and the applications are open source based. So the code's out there for review, and and people can code and modify and do all kinds of things with it. Apple has always taken a closed proprietary approach to their software, kind of the walled garden approach. Um, some argue that that's better. In my opinion, I would say it's more security through obscurity than anything else. Um, but again, that's an opinion base. So as we dig into this a little bit, one of the things to point out is of the known attacks out there, 97% currently are based on Android. So
So this could almost be correlated to why Windows would be argued versus Mac. Mac as a perception was seemingly more secure. It was probably just a smaller market share than 95% at one point
well,
to
exactly.
98% was Windows. So
So
Android seems to be.
yeah, if we look at malware availability on the Mac side versus Windows, on the Mac side though, in 2014 we saw, or I'm sorry, 2013, we saw 1,700 unique malware packages out in the wild
Hmm.
for the Mac platform. Now that jumped to 1,800 in 2014, and it's continuing to rise. And it's going up in proportion to market share. The more Macs we see on desktops, the more malware we see in the wild. Now, what's interesting, there's a security author with one of the major antivirus companies out there, and he makes a pretty dramatic comment. And what he said is Mac OS X software has more high-risk vulnerabilities than all versions of Windows put together. Apple markets these products as virus-free, and they say you don't need antivirus because they know people hate antivirus software. And that's a really interesting take because there's another thing that brings to play is antivirus software is one of the ways that we use to detect what's out there and new variants if they have a similar signature to an older variant, right? So if none of that stuff, right now there's an estimation that roughly 50% of the Mac computers out there on the marketplace have antivirus installed. Of that, 35% have it turned on. So that's an awfully large percentage that don't have any protection on them, and there's no way to tell whether they're infected or not. So, by assuming or making the assumption or buying into the myth that one platform is more secure than the other, we're perpetuating a problem.
Sure, it's not. It's circumventing convenience over best practice, right? Because anytime whether it's a personal workstation, whether it's for a university or any other place of employment, you should think of the most secure and then alleviate as it might be inconvenient for you to be able to do your job, rather than thinking of the latter, like completely
Well,
leave it open and then harden, going up the stack per se,
exactly.
going in that direction. So.
And you really hit on the root of it is it's convenience versus security.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more secure it is, the less convenient it is. So really, when we break this down, it's not really an argument of which one's more secure than the other. That can be argued back and forth all day long. At the end of the day, both platforms, Android and Apple, have great security controls built in, and they both have additional add-ons that are free or paid in their respective stores that enhance those security controls even more. Most of them without getting underfoot, so they don't get in your way. The real problem, the root of the matter is how we use the device. Do we have PIN codes or some kind of password lock on the device to prevent somebody getting access to it if it's stolen? Are we encrypting it if it has encryption available to it? Do we even know how to encrypt it? And the most important thing is, are we keeping up to date with application patches? The little update thing, you have so many updates available. I know a lot of people that just ignore it and don't
Sure.
update their stuff.
And that's why, through certain controls and degrees for workstations, we, try to push that it should be regularly updated to,
Right.
ensure anytime maybe a 0-day, which is a vulnerability that doesn't have anything that could be fixed, could be remedied relatively quick upon its discovery. Um, and then that way, if you regularly update, you're likely to have that and not be vulnerable for those types of risks.
Right. So in the workplace, that's pretty easy for us to control because a lot of our devices are managed and we push down those updates as they become available. But more and more and more, we're seeing users bring in their own devices to do work on. So we have little to no control over what's on those devices or how they're being updated or not. And that's really a big thing, a big deal is as we go forward, one, you always want to be thoughtful about where's this application you're installing coming from? Do does the publisher have a good reputation? Have they been around a while? What's this new whiz bang thing you're going to download onto your phone going to do for you? So it's worth doing a little research. Just Google it and see what comes up. Is it known? Is it unknown? Has someone reported it as malware or loading malware or adware onto their phone? Because what we're seeing is increasingly as the iPhones work to gain more market share, they're getting more popular with the cybercrime community as well.
Sure. And so, kind of feeding off of that. So whether a phone is rooted or you jailbreak in it, let's say iPhone is jailbroken, so you can do more advanced things that the normal security controls lock you down to being able to do. Um, so what would be more specific about the inherent risks when you jailbreak or root an Android phone, for example?
Well, when you root an Android phone, you got to remember these phones are small computers. So you're essentially opening yourself up as full administrator on the device. Whereas generally speaking, you're running as a standard user on the phone, which only has certain permissions. But as a rooted or jailbroken device, you have full system level access. Now, that means when you fire up an application, you're allowing that application to run at those elevated privileges, meaning you may have just given somebody the keys to your kingdom.
Yeah. So that way, some people typically, jailbreak or root a phone because there's a feature such as leveraging the 4G hotspot that normally you have to pay for. But if
Mm-hmm.
you jailbreak or root a phone, there's certain third-party applications or open source applications that might allow you to use that. So then you run the risk of, if you don't vet that properly, that's essentially what you're saying, the keys of the kingdom. That
Well,
might open a
and not
back
only that,
door, or
and not only that, you could be violating the terms of service with your carrier, which I mean they have every right then, depending on you, because they will monitor your usage patterns. And if they see a spike in data usage on a phone that doesn't have that capability, they're going to start asking questions.
So, want
So
to
it's,
continue with that thought with the root and jailbreaking. Um, so, do you know of other platforms such as Windows Mobile or BlackBerry? Do they have those capabilities to be rooted or jailbroken? Uh,
um, I've never heard of anything with BlackBerry, and they represent so little of the market share anymore. I don't know.
okay,
I've not spent any time looking into that. The Windows Mobile side, if it hasn't happened already, it's just a matter of time till they
sure.
figure out the how.
And yeah, and I mean, I don't know if that wasn't necessarily one of the hot topics for the leading platforms, but I imagine Windows 10 and their Surface
Hmm.
tablets, and also their push for the market share in the smartphone space. I'm
Right.
sure it'd follow the same pattern. As they get more popular, you may begin to see the capability of rooting or jailbreaking, and then also follow shortly behind with security risks and other
Exactly.
vulnerabilities. So,
Exactly.
so
So do we have any questions?
yeah. So another one is regarding the ability to remotely start a phone, even if it's powered off, which
Mhm.
is highlighted from a another hot topic being Edward Snowden and disclosing government information about what was done for the which organization, I don't recall. Is it CIA?
NSA. NSA.
NSA. Yeah.
So
But what kind of risk would that pose, or what? what might have implemented that capability? Just any kind of thoughts on what that entails?
Generally speaking, and I don't want to get too far in down the Snowden rabbit trail because that can lead all kinds of places.
Sure. Yeah.
But generally speaking, if your phone has a battery in it, it can be remotely turned on based on code that your three-letter agencies may or may not have.
Sure. And again, so it's since that's more of a touchy topic, I think we'll keep it simple with that. But what would you say about if you were to have? Let me look here. The question is an iPad.
Mhm.
Um, so keeping a system out of the box and let's say the firmware is exactly the way they like it, it doesn't change like the icons, the way they interact with the operating system. Is
Mhm.
it okay to stay on that level of firmware, or is it always recommended to always update,
It's
as things
always
are released?
recommended to update and keep current with the updates that are available because part of the reason that we have those updates is for security patching.
Hmm.
So as vulnerabilities are found in the operating system on the tablet, some of the patches that are released are specifically to close security vulnerabilities. So if you're staying on an older one, you're exposing yourself to greater risk.
And you're talking about both levels, not just the operating system of the device, but also any of the applications.
Applications and the operating system of the device both, yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think what's important to be more specific with that. For example, I have Verizon as my carrier, and there's a lot of proprietary Verizon applications that I'm not particularly fond of updating that occupy space because I don't use the application.
Right.
But because it is built in, and I don't have my phone rooted for me to try
Hmm.
to carve it out of the system, I still follow that best practice, because if there's some kind of vulnerability in one of those built-in applications, if you think about it, everybody has that built-in application,
Correct.
and everybody becomes part of that target, an attack surface that some organization could leverage.
Yeah, and I'm on a different carrier, but I have the same problem. I've got a bunch of pre-installed applications that I can't get rid of, but I do keep them up to date for the same reason.
Sure. So one of the questions was asking what you particularly carry, and would you have anything different, or would you recommend anyone have anything different? I mean, that's kind of, it's still, I think, very opinionated, but
I have actually used both. I've had iPhones and I've had Androids. My current device is an Android, um, and I'm pretty happy with it. But again, I've used both.
okay. And then let's see here. Let me make sure I haven't missed any. Um, I think I've covered from what's in the Q&A, but what something I was interested in is that BlackBerry is now now partnering or starting to build out as an Android platform. BlackBerry for a while, right before Apple had taken over the smartphone market share.
Right.
BlackBerry was known as like the business, kind of the de facto, aside from Palm, if anyone remembers using Palm as a platform. What would you think BlackBerry would they just try to kind of slipstream into the general Android market, or do you think they might do something different, like they've done what BlackBerry did for years that was successful, and try to hold on to kind of those original, you know, uh,
I would be surprised if BlackBerry made any kind of a reasonable presence back in the marketplace. I really would be. They had their niche. They held it for a lot of years. I just don't see them making a comeback from where they are now. I could be wrong, but
okay, sure. Um, Trying to see any other. I'm not seeing any other particular questions that I'm pretty confident I've covered what's been in
okay.
the Q&A. Additionally, so you had mentioned some products that are some are free, some might be paid.
Hmm.
Which ones would you have a list for either either platform that would add some security enhancements that it doesn't do out of the box.
Well, for one, there's antivirus for both devices available, either Apple or Android. There are paid packages, there are free packages. Just take a look through the respective stores for antivirus. There's also Lost My Phone functionality that's baked in on both platforms, but there's some enhanced features available with some of the third-party add-ons. Um, so it's good stuff to look at. There's also device encryption to look at to see whether it may already be built in. So look into turning that on the our website security.ap.edu. We talk about mobile device security and a bunch of tips and tricks for really good best practices for your phone, regardless of what platform you're on, that really make it more secure to use, and then also help prevent any kind of loss if you lose the device. Because think about it, if you don't have a lock on your phone, a simple thing like that, and somebody else gets a hold of it, what are they getting access to? Are they getting access to your personal email, your work email, OneDrive, SkyDrive, Box, Dropbox? All of those have clients that sync down to a phone or tablet. And so what would someone with ill intent do with your device? What would they have access to? It's always a good question to ask yourself once in a while as you look at your phone and say, really, what do I need on this thing? Um,
So one question that came in is something that is an open source project for a lot of different phone makers. So the Symbian OS as a smartphone platform, which I
mhm,
think would also tie into Firefox pushing their own
mhm.
first smartphone. I think it's
Yep.
purely driven by their by web coding,
hmm
web programming languages. Um, would you would it just, do you think it would just follow the same convention that these are such a small footprint in the market? They'd probably be more relatively safe, or should there still be caution towards platforms like
Yeah.
that?
Regardless of how small their market share is, you do want to be careful. You always want to be careful. Because again, you don't want to get into a position where you're relying on security through obscurity, where you're hiding in the crowd. Because you don't want to be the guy saying, "Well, I use something that's very different and that's not very common, so therefore, chances of someone finding me are small." Because you, at that point, you become the person who will be found. Yeah, it's kind of Murphy's law.
Okay,
But
because that was one of the things I found interesting. I attended uh, a convention, Southern California Linux Expo,
hmm
and Firefox's booth was strictly about promoting Firefox as an operating system,
right.
um, which also I believe either Ubuntu as a flavor of Linux is also getting into that market.
Well, they
Um,
actually have a few. I thought they already had a smartphone platform out there.
I wasn't sure if it was general release or if it was still in beta. But in either case, it, to me, it was interesting to see open source projects,
hmm
starting to get into that. Not just Android being an open source driven project, but other parts of the community, getting in on that type of market share. So for
There
me,
were
understanding. Oh, go ahead.
there were some really neat projects a while back, and they were based on I think Ubuntu,
Mhm.
where basically you could hook your phone up, you could run it in desktop mode, and it had a cradle that you could hook up a keyboard, mouse, and monitor to, and use it like a full desktop OS during the day, and then switch it to phone mode and uncradle it, and it just became a regular phone for whenever you weren't at your desk. I don't know where that project ever went. I haven't kept up with it, but I think that when you think about it, that's the direction we're going. When you look at Apple, Windows, in particular, they're both trying to unify the user experience across devices, have the same look and feel across all their devices.
Sure.
Microsoft's big push is with Windows 10. Try to get that same look and feel, no matter if it's a phone, a tablet, a full computer OS. It looks and feels the same. Apple has that a familiar feel regardless of what platform you're on, whether it's an iMac or an iPad. It's they're moving closer and closer and closer to get that same look and feel and interaction with the device. So as we see that more and more, and the horsepower on these small devices continues to increase, I think we're going to see some really interesting trends in the market.
So related to antivirus, so similar to Windows, Windows is a closed operating system. Mac OS X is a closed operating system, but regardless, it's still recommended to have antivirus on those systems.
Yes.
Uh, and the same for iOS. So even though they're closed systems, there's still security software that is effective,
Hmm.
even though they may not know necessarily how everything works under the hood. So that would still be the best recommendation.
Yes, absolutely. So when you think about it, Microsoft has the majority of the market share for desktops and laptops, right?
Mhm.
And but for years they've been under attack because they're the majority. They hold that majority. They're the largest platform out there. So as Mac and Apple continue to increase, they are going to become an increasingly larger target. And we're going to see an increasing trend of malware available. So the best practice is always, always, always use the best security controls available. And one of just the simplest things you can do is to have antivirus installed on your device, regardless of what that device is.
And as far as performance, because that's one of the again, that's something I touched upon earlier, being the convenience versus security.
Hmm.
A lot of times, compute was an issue because systems didn't have as much that they do today. If you're to look at the cost of a PC and what kind of processor and RAM and drive it comes with compared to 5 years ago for the
Hmm.
same price, you would see almost exponential compute. So it almost seems that the inconvenience of it, occupying more resources, is less likely to be experienced with newer devices, whether it be a
Yeah,
smartphone or um,
with the
that's
hardware the way it is today, and the enhancements in the antivirus software itself, between the two, you're not going to see a huge difference in performance at all. You're right. It used to be, I mean, back in the day, it was a big deal because anything that consumed resources had an impact on system performance. And antivirus typically was not that well done back then, so it did consume a lot of resources.
okay.
But
And
that's
then
not really the case anymore.
sure. Um, yeah, and that again, as the technology increases, it always seems to have those hardware enhancements without necessarily being a larger part of the cost for the devices.
Mhm.
So it seems to be, pretty following that same trend that you'll still get more exponential resources on the performance enhancements and things like that, and also the fine tuning that each does. I'm sure Android itself out of the box. Some people will argue, well, I root my phone because it'll perform better by the different firmwares and enhancements I add. Again, that'd be different opinions and a different discussion. But again, the convenience of it performing better versus the security risk you might be opening
Yeah.
would be the considerations overall.
And if you're going to root or jailbreak your device, you just have to understand right from the start that you're breaking down a lot of the security controls that are there to protect you.
Yep. And then also, if warranty is an issue or anything like that, there's obviously other
Oh yeah,
other kinds of
a lot of those
you know
activities will void the warranty on the device.
yeah. So that's another important consideration. If it's out of warranty, then hey, have free reign and use
It's
at your
just
own
always
risk.
about how you use it and where you use it and
Mhm.
what you connect it to.
All right. So then, last to wrap up, were there any particular platforms as far as within the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, specifically for secure browsers or secure antivirus, or just didn't know if you had any like particular, like let's say Symantec or something that you have experienced or any that you recommend?
I've used a number of different antivirus products out there and just given them a trial run. Lookout Mobile is a nice one. Avast has a good product.
Hmm.
I think ESET is stepping into the mobile market. There's any of the big names that are out there are usually can be trusted. I mean, the big players in the antivirus and security market, just play around, find which one works best for you. I don't really want to go out there and recommend one or over the other, but I do
Sure.
want to say stay with kind of your name brands
Okay.
in that space.
Fair
People
enough.
who have a good track record in doing that type of work.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank all the attendees, and Shawn, thanks again for taking a look at what Android and iPhone has, and some of the kind of important topics to be mindful of for having a secure platform, or what should be done. And again, if anyone has any other subsequent questions, you're welcome to send them. Is it security.apu.edu?
Security.ap.edu.
Yep. And then, there might be some things that we could, field on the next topic around. But again, we appreciate you attending. And again, if you have any other questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to us.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right. All right. Take care.
Bye.